Autobots and Decepticons. My name's Danny Whitaker. This is My Own Worst Enemy. Podcast for people that are tapped in the head, like me. Okay, so, just in case you were wondering, I fixed my jeans problem from last week. I had to nip to the supermarket the other day. Leanne was making a cake for her dad's birthday, needed some ingredients. And the rip between my legs had got so big that I was walking around the supermarket clenching my arse cheeks together, trying to hold everything in place. I'm not even joking. Genuinely, when I was walking down the fridge aisle, I could feel a draft up my trouser leg, or down my trouser leg. And it was so busy in there that I didn't bend down to pick anything up off the shelves because I didn't want to inadvertently flash somebody. So yeah, I'd had enough. Even though I don't do clothes shopping and stuff, I just went and picked some jeans up from the clothing section in the supermarket. I hadn't got a clue what size it was because I've gotten fat recently, so I just sort of guessed. And luckily these stretchy jeans seem to be in fashion at the minute, so yeah, I just about squeezed into the ones I got. So these are going to have to last me till 2020 now. I'm such a skinflint. Even though my ass was genuinely on show, I nearly changed my mind when I saw the price. £12.50, which is like, I don't know, $15, $16 American, but you can buy a needle and thread for a knicker. That's £1, by the way. So, anyway, I've got them now, so disaster averted. And that's enough. Enough about my ass. 2 weeks running talking about that. So, anyway, today's topic is by request. Beloved friend of the family, Ella. Won't give a surname. You'll end up getting random Facebook friend requests. Anyway, she's at university studying nutritional science, or something like that, something to do with nutrition. And, she's done a bachelor's degree, and now she's doing a master's. And now she's kind of rising up the ranks, up the totem pole. She said she started to feel a bit like a fraud, like she doesn't actually feel like she deserves to be there, and that, eventually someone's going to kind of catch her out and give her a marching orders. Well, this psychological phenomenon is actually quite common, and it has a name. It's known as the Imposter Syndrome. So, my guest today is Dr. Valerie Young. Valerie is an entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and world-renowned expert on the Imposter Syndrome. Valerie first experienced imposter feelings herself during a graduate program at the University of Massachusetts in 1982, and she's been studying the phenomenon ever since. After 30 years of insight, in 2011, she published the award-winning book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from the Imposter Syndrome, and How to Thrive in Spite of It. To date, she's taught her How to Feel as Bright and Capable as Everyone Seems to Think You Are program to over 80,000 people at organisations such as Boeing, IBM, Apple, and Facebook. In today's episode, we discuss the origins of the imposter phenomenon, why people experience it, who's most susceptible, why it can be harmful to our careers and mental health, and, most importantly, how to overcome it. You can follow Valerie on Twitter. She's at Valerie Young, just at Valerie Young, nice and simple. You can go to her website, that's just impostersyndrome.com. As always, if you'd like to comment on this episode, you can do so by going to myownworstenemy.org/podcast. That's also where you'll find all the show notes, any relevant links and information. Tell you what, Ella, final message to you. I've got some proper stingy listeners, right? 30,000 plays so far, and I've got 2 reviews on iTunes. 2. So, I know you're an iPhone girl, so if you don't get your little ass over to iTunes in the next week and leave me a 5-star review for doing this, researching it, arranging it, recording it, editing it, all at your behest, don't expect a lift to or from the train station from me ever again. Your ass is walking. So, blackmail officially issued. Ella and everybody else, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Valerie Young. Right, okay. Dr. Valerie Young, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here, Danny.
Okay, what I usually do, my usual setup with these interviews is I like to start by asking people how they got into whatever particular field of expertise they're working in. But in this instance, I think it's better to actually establish what this topic is actually about, because I know that a lot of people might not necessarily be familiar with it straight off the bat. So could you kind of give us a kind of a brief description of what exactly imposter syndrome is, and kind of also why it matters? And then we'll dive into it from there.
Sure, absolutely. The imposter phenomenon, as it's more, kind of accurately known in the world of psychology, Danny, but often, as you said, it's much more popularly known as the imposter syndrome. But the imposter phenomena was something that was a term that was coined in the 1970s by two psychologists, Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes in the U.S. at Georgia State University. And it describes a set of feelings whereby, despite evidence to the contrary, it could be good grades or degrees, awards, promotions, publications, Academy Awards for that matter. A lot of bright, capable, competent people have a hard time really internalizing their success, and instead they attribute it to factors outside of themselves, to things like, luck or timing or connections, or they just like me, or if I can do it, anyone can. I actually heard a guy say, if I can get a PhD in astrophysics from Caltech, anybody can.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So briefly as well, and we'll get into this. Why is it? Why is it a thing that deserves attention?
Oh gosh, for many reasons. It's a feeling, but out of that feeling comes various, what Clance and Imes would refer to as coping and protecting mechanisms, Danny. I mean, you have to find a way, again, on an unconscious level, to kind of manage the anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop, of waiting to be found out, and ways to avoid being detected. So on a very unconscious level, we do things like, I refer to it as flying under the radar. So you may not, speak up in meetings, ask questions, share your ideas, go for more challenging opportunities, grow your business, kind of throw your hat into the ring in one way or another. For some people, it leads to procrastination, or just never starting or never finishing the degree, the book, the painting, the business plan. For others, it manifests itself in workaholism, over preparing for everything that they do, staying longer, studying harder, not out of the sense that it's what's required for the task, but out of the sense that I have to work harder than other people because I'm not as inherently, smart as other folks. So it shows up in different ways that really, can have a cost to the individual.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in my email to you, particularly in our discussion today. I'd like to kind of keep the focus, not like a laser-like focus on it, but kind of around the particular experience of students. And the reason for that is, I suppose that this subject is one that you might find discussed more on, say, a self-development podcast or like a business podcast, something like that. And then some people might wonder why it's relevant to a mental health podcast. And the reason I think it's relevant is because it seems to be that one of the main kinds of people that struggle with this is students. And of course, like the vast majority of first onset of mental health issues happens in adolescence and early adulthood. And I think a massive contributing factor to that is kind of the stress that people go through as a student in college, university. And I think kind of any contribution you can make towards kind of allaying those stresses, I think that definitely gives this it warrants its place on this particular podcast. So let's go back a little bit first and tell me a little bit about your history, how you came to specialize in this particular subject.
It was a very personal experience for me, Danny. I was actually in a doctoral program at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I was probably 22 years old at the time. And by the way, this might come up later as a relevant contributing factor. My mother was also working at the university at the time. She was working as a second shift custodian. She was a janitor at the university. And someone brought in a paper called The Imposter Phenomenon Amongst High Achieving Women by Dr. Pauline Clance and Dr. Suzanne Imes, and started describing how they found all these, bright, capable, competent people at universities, felt like they were fooling people and were going to be found out. And honestly, Danny, I sat there kind of nodding my head like a bobblehead dog, going, oh my God, that's me. Yeah. And then I looked around and all the other graduate students were nodding their head. And this was stunning to me. This was remarkable because I knew their work. I knew they deserved to be there. So what we did, we decided to start a little imposter support group. And we started meeting after class and talking about being intellectual frauds and how we're fooling all of our professors. But what happened to me, and happens to a lot of people, is, everything went pretty well for a couple of weeks. But then I started to have this nagging sense that even though everyone else was saying they were an imposter, like I knew I was the only real imposter, and they were, phony imposters, if you will.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. This is a endemic in higher education at colleges and universities. I've actually spoken at well over 80 colleges and universities in the U.S. and Canada, and it affects undergraduates. It definitely affects graduate students and also faculty as well.
Yeah. Do you think that study that was done at the time by Pauline Clance and Susan Imes, do you think that represents like a genuinely new psychological discovery, or was it more kind of a composite, like the discovery of a composite of personality traits? Like what do you think it represents in that sense?
Yeah, it was I think very controversial at the time, for several reasons, because they very quickly determined a lot of men can feel this way as well, and it's not specific to women. But I also, I don't know, I think I'll leave that to the folks in the psychological community to hammer that one out. But I know it was controversial in that, some folks very quickly labeled it, as kind of a syndrome, which it clearly is not. I think they really did discover something in a way that might have been talked around, or certainly we've talked about fear of failure, for many years, but I think that they really got much more in depth, as well as many hundreds of subsequent studies. I mean, this has been highly studied, primarily because graduate students feel it, so they decide to go and study it. But they really have been able to, I think, put together a larger pattern that is very specific to the imposter experience.
Yeah, I mean, I know you just said then that it's since been discovered, if you like, that men struggle with it as well as women do, and I think Pauline and Suzanne both came around to that viewpoint as well. But I was wondering if it was maybe kind of the discovery might have been like a product of its time, because it came in the 70s. And this is speculative, and I haven't really gone into this. And I think you were saying you was at college at the time. I was wondering if it was maybe because, during the 70s was when women were kind of entering the workplace in larger numbers, and more women were going to college, and then maybe it kind of emerged out of the kind of feminist revolution of the 60s, maybe.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely on to something, and I'm happy you're talking about this, because I've never heard anyone connect those particular dots before, and I think that they're important dots. I think because it was a time when women have always been in the workplace, especially in the U.S., Black women and low income women, because they had to. But it was the first time that middle class and white women en masse were going off for advanced degrees and going into management positions. So I think there was a certain amount of just, kind of role fraudulence, if you will, the sense of, if you were raised as I was, that you were going to, grow up and get married and have some kids and maybe become a teacher to have something to fall back on, if something happened to your husband. And then suddenly you're getting a doctoral degree, or you're a CEO. You can kind of look in the mirror and go like, well, who are you? This isn't what you were supposed to be doing. But also I think, and I'm just thinking about this for the first time, you've really made me think that I think also it made sense that they were now hearing this from women, because we do know that women as a group, I mean, we're generalizing here, right? But based on a lot of research, women as a group are more likely to internalize failure, mistakes, and criticism. And boys and men as a group, cross-culturally, they're more likely to look for factors outside of themselves to explain why they failed the test or got a bad letter of recommendation from a faculty member. So it could also be that the women were much more forthcoming in their feelings of inadequacy.
Yeah, that'd be consistent with I think the kind of the attitude that men have towards kind of exposing themselves in like the mental health realm as well. Is, guys don't like to confess these feelings. The guys don't like to talk about these kinds of things. They're much less likely to admit to having that kind of experience. I can imagine now people coming to this for the first time. One question that kind of naturally springs from it is one of definition, because we haven't quite got into the thick of it yet. But an immediate question that might arise is, how does this differ from, say, something like just straight pessimism, just expecting things to go wrong, or something like an inferiority complex, just that kind of belief that, the people around you are just better than you and you're not cut from the same cloth, maybe.
Right. And there are some people who have studied the connection between, pessimism and imposter syndrome. Forget the name of the researcher. First name is Julie, but I know she looked at, defensive pessimism, which sometimes is a technique we use unconsciously because it kind of protects. If we expect it's going to go badly and then it does, then we've insulated ourselves a little bit, and also worked harder to prevent it from going badly. But I'm glad you asked that question, because often when I meet people socially, Danny, and they ask me what I do, and I say I speak on imposter syndrome and write on imposter syndrome, and they'll say, "Oh, you mean low self-esteem?" And I really don't. If we think of just broadly self-esteem as being a global sense that we have about ourselves, imposter syndrome is very specific to achievement arenas, to work, school, academics, career. You don't feel like an imposter when you're walking the dog or petting the cat or, doing the laundry, but you do in a job interview or in a classroom, or when you're asked to get up and make a presentation. So there have been some studies that have linked low self-esteem and imposter feelings, and then other studies have not found a link. So, to my mind, it means it is possible to have, fairly good self-esteem and still have imposter feelings.
Yeah, that link to specific link to achievement is interesting, because it seems to be that the more you make progress, the worse the imposter syndrome is going to become. Is that correct? Yeah.
Well, now you're fooling more people on a higher level. There's farther to fall, which for some people is a reason why they hold back. That they do fly under the radar. That they really could achieve considerably more, but it's too risky to kind of put yourself out there. Years ago, I met a guy, his coping mechanism was, for some people, there's various forms of self-sabotage. His was, he would leave his job about every 4 years as the head of a hospital, because he felt like that's about the time they'd figure out, he didn't know what he was doing. Of course, he did, but that's how he coped with it.
Yeah, jumping before you pushed, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to students. I mean, the problem for students, which of course universities bring me in because they love students, but they also know that there's a consequence, right? There's, stress has consequences. Sadly, there's, especially at elite schools, there's, kids hurt themselves. They commit suicide, because of the stress. And I'm not going to suggest it's all about imposter syndrome, but especially, at these very elite schools, there's, significant amount of stress on these kids, and or they just drop out, or they kind of change majors. You see a lot of, especially young women, going into the university in a STEM field, and then they fail a class or they fail a test, and then they take that as kind of proof that they don't belong in that area, and they switch into history or English or something that they see as that they can handle.
I suppose what's kind of what's unique about this phenomenon is this idea of kind of being caught and being caught out. And it raises the question, as somebody that, I mean, I've never kind of experienced this I won't say I'm exactly a high flyer or anything, but, there's been various fields I've entered into and I've done pretty well for myself, but and I've never experienced it. And so from the outside looking in, an immediate thing that springs to mind is, I see it as, you can't do what you can't do. So how can you feel like an imposter while simultaneously achieving? Because the only reason you could be achieving is through a meritocracy. And I'm wondering what, especially with this idea of being caught out, what is there to be unmasked? What is that fear? What's that based on?
Well, it doesn't surprise me, though, because if you have not experienced imposter syndrome, then what you just said, Danny, you can't do what you can't do. That's what I would call non-imposter thinking, right? That's how non-imposters think. I always tell my students, there's only one difference between people who feel like imposters and people who don't. They're no more intelligent, they're no more capable, they're no more talented than you and I. The only difference between them and us is they think different thoughts. That's it. Which is really good news, because, my job then is to help them to learn how to think like a non-imposter, to think like, well, you can't do what you can't do, or, well, everybody's good at something, or, well, I had an off day, I'll get them tomorrow. But that's not how imposters think. They have that nobody likes to fail. No one likes to make a mistake. No one likes to have an off day, criticized, fail a class. No one likes that. But when these things happen to people who feel like imposters, we experience shame, because we feel we're operating out of this unrealistic, unsustainable, kind of imposter rule book around competence, failure, mistakes, criticism. And when I get, even if I have 300 people in an auditorium, I always get them into groups, which they're surprised, because they're used to being talked to, lectured to, and I make them get into a group and I have them come up with the imposter rule book. Which says, if I was really intelligent, capable, competent, I'd always, I'd never. And they always come up with things like, I would never need any help. I'd always be able to figure things out by myself. I'd always get it right the first time. A doctoral student at Stanford said, I feel like I should already know what I came here to learn.
Right. Okay.
And that's why I want them to talk to other people, hear that other people have these crazy rules. Then I want to have them, say these out loud. We start collecting them in the presentation, so that collectively they can hear this is like crazy talk, and that no human on the planet could possibly sustainably hit these marks that we who feel like imposters try to do.
So, right, okay. Just briefly before we move on to the next part, how would I was going to use the word diagnose, but that wouldn't be correct. It's not a clinical diagnosis, is it? So how would you, what's kind of a pithy way of realizing that this is something that you struggle with? How to kind of spot the imposter syndrome in yourself?
Well, a few things. I think if you're constantly kind of saying, let's say someone compliments you and you have a hard time, it's not false modesty, right? You really have a hard time internalizing those achievements. And so it's kind of, sure, I was successful, but I could explain all that. If you find yourself saying, oh, I was lucky, it was just right time, right place, they just like me, if I could do it, anyone can. Or I've heard many, very creative excuses over the years. After I got the job, I found out the hiring committee had come directly from a wine function. So maybe they were drunk. An engineering professor from Argentina said when he got his job, he said, they never tell you why did they give you the job and not someone else? And once he got the job, he found out the dean was a huge fan of Argentine tango. Or I think especially for women and racial minority students, often someone plants the seed, someone tells them, oh, you're only here because you're a woman or you're minority. If you yourself find yourself explaining away or minimizing or just discounting evidence of your abilities, if you have this inherent belief that other people are more capable and especially smart. And I hope we get to talk about the word smart, because that's a very loaded term that people feel like imposters get very invested in being, quote unquote, smart. Then those are kind of, warning signs that you're probably experiencing imposter feelings.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we're possibly going to be touching on this in a minute now. So I was I'm interested in the concept of maybe predisposition to imposter syndrome. And if, in some of the interviews that I've listened to you do, one of the interesting factors that you mention is the four different personality types: a perfectionist, expert, soloist, and the natural genius. So could you just take us through those four, what they consist of, and then why they predispose those personality types?
Sure. And I don't even know if I'd call them personality types as much as, in doing that exercise that I went through a minute ago, where I have these groups put together the imposter rule book. What I really observed over the years, having done that hundreds and hundreds of times, Danny, is that even though people who feel like imposters all, kind of skew what it means to be competent, we don't all skew it the same way. It became increasingly clear to me that we don't all experience failure the same way and shame the same way, because we're not all holding ourselves to the standard of competence in the same way. So yes, so there's the perfectionist, of course. Their definition of competence is everything they do has to be, 100% flawless every single time. Some minor, they do an exceptional presentation and they forget to make one minor point, or they stumble over, one word. I mean, everything every time has to be A plus. A minus would be humiliating. So lots of opportunity for shame when you feel like an imposter. When you feel like when you are a perfectionist, because failure to the perfectionist is basically everything. Because even if they do it perfectly, they're probably still not satisfied because they feel like they could have done it better.
Right.
Then the person I call the expert, that's kind of the knowledge version of the perfectionist. Unlike, so for the perfectionist, it's all about the quality of their work. Now, experts care about the quality too, but where they really focus is much more on the quantity of knowledge and information that they have. And in their mind, they can never have enough, so you see this with students. There's always one more book to take. One more book to read, one more class to take, all the way to one more degree to get. They're kind of searching for that endless pursuit of the end of knowledge. So shame for that person, failure for that person is going to be, the professor asked them a question and, God forbid, they don't know the answer. That would evoke deep shame. They feel like they should know everything about their field.
Okay.
Which, of course, is not possible. The soloist, that's the person who believes it only counts if I do it all by myself. The fact that I need mentoring or to be in a study group or any kind of coaching, tutoring kind of proves I'm inept. And the natural genius is the name I gave to the person who somehow got it into his or her head that if I was really intelligent, capable, competent, this wouldn't be this hard. The fact that they have to struggle to master, calculus or statistics or writing doesn't come easily to them, or whatever it might be. Anywhere where there's struggle or difficulty, that evokes shame. That feels like failure because they feel like, it should always be about ease and speed.
Yeah.
So the struggle prompts shame.
What about, do we know if there's any kind of, like somebody's upbringing, parenting styles that can maybe result in this?
Oh, absolutely. I often ask people to raise their hand, well, how many of you were the kid who came home with 4 A's? Because in the US, at the top grade would be an A, and then one, A minus or B plus, and your family's only response was, what's that, what's that B plus doing there?
Right.
Right. So the message kids got early on is the only thing that's acceptable is perfection. And for kids, praise is like oxygen. But other kids got a different message. They might have come home with outstanding grades, and their family was like, whatever. They really didn't praise the child. And it's not because they're, bad, evil, sadistic people. I mean, maybe it's just expected. Maybe they don't value education. Maybe they define success as going into the military or the family business or producing some grandchildren. Maybe they didn't get it growing up, so they don't know how to give it. Maybe it's cultural. They don't praise in particular cultures. There's lots of reasons, but still for the child, if you didn't get praise, you're going to spend your whole life trying to get your family to notice you as being quote unquote smart. Especially if another kid got designated as the smart one in the family. Dr. Joan Harvey talked about family myths and labels, that kids get labeled early on. So there might be the funny one, the athletic one, the shy one, the bad one, and then there's always the smart one. And so if you got to be the smart one, that's a lot of pressure. And if you didn't get to be the smart one, this is where I tell my audiences I'm going to try to save them a lot of time and money in therapy. They let it go, right? They picked a smart one. It's not you. Deal done. Move on.
I imagine class might be a thing. I mean, I'm not sure if classism exists the same way in America that it does over here. But,
I'm sure it does.
Yeah, this kind of the idea of social mobility. I'm imagining if you're the first generation to maybe go to university, that could definitely. I mean, I could just imagine that. I never went to university, but I mean, just the idea of it kind of makes me shudder, if I'm honest.
Yep.
And so, is that quite a common one?
Absolutely. That's a group I would consider much more susceptible. Is we would call them first gen students, first generation students. There's whole programs at schools like MIT and Stanford for first gen students because there's a higher dropout rate. And so, yeah, you can feel out of your element. Sonia Sotomayor is on the Supreme Court here in the U.S., and she grew up in a financially disadvantaged, poor community in the Bronx. She graduated top of her class. She got a full academic scholarship to Princeton University. And she said when she got there, she felt like she was visiting an alien land. She kept waiting for someone to tap her on the shoulder and say, you don't belong here. And I know there was a study in the UK that found that, young people who went to, kind of elite private prep schools had, less imposter feelings than those who had not, who had gone to public schools. So I do think that there's a factor that, especially if you go on to an elite university.
Yeah, I was wondering, because you obviously you meet a lot of students, and this is your topic. Do you ever meet students of like wealthy families that still get this? Because I can't imagine how that'd manifest if you've kind of if that's kind of your environment, and you expect to go to a good school, and you already expect to be intelligent, and you're going to make something of yourself. But can that still happen to people, or is that less prevalent?
Oh no, they can, especially if there was some research a while ago that found that people who had two high achieving parents, who are both highly educated, they're more susceptible, because suddenly you're comparing yourself to your parents.
Right.
I think, there are certain parents, if you're in a very highly competitive environment, they're spending all this money to get their kids into these private, kindergartens and having these kids take these advanced placement classes. I mean, there's tremendous pressure on, certain kids to not only get into the right school, but to get into the right school to get the right degree. I spoke in Canada recently, and a professor came up to me afterwards, and she was very emotional. She was very teary because her son had just dropped out of high school. And he said he felt like he was never going to be smart enough for her. And she realized she'd been really emphasizing being smart. And I really advocate de-emphasizing smart.
Oh, you know what? We've mentioned this on a previous podcast about childhood mental health, and I can't remember the name of the researcher. I think she wrote a book on this about how it's better to praise a child based on effort rather than saying that they're telling them that they're inherently smart. Right.
It's Carol Dweck.
That's the one.
Dweck out of Stanford, and the book is called Mindset.
Yes.
And there's a very strong connection between her findings and imposter syndrome. As a matter of fact, I'd seen her research in the academic literature for years, Danny, but people in academia are kind of forced to write in this very dense, convoluted, language that's known internally, but to the outside person, it's hard to read and hard to understand. When she finally wrote it in, everyday accessible language, I was like, oh my God, that her work it mirrored what I was finding anecdotally, she was finding quantitatively, which was that people who feel like imposters hold themselves to these very high standards, going back to the perfectionist, the expert, the natural genius. I mean, I just broke it out differently. But yeah, her findings were that, kids who get very invested in being smart don't have a lot of resilience to failure, criticism, struggle, adversity. She had a chapter on parenting, and one of the suggestions I love, which was instead of that typical dinner time conversation with school age kids, which is, what did you learn in school today? To which kids always say nothing, or I don't remember. She said, wouldn't it be better if not every night, but every so often it was a different story? You went around and said, let's all talk about something that was difficult or challenging or we failed at and how we dealt with it. And the parents would be included in that conversation, because that's what you want to teach people. And, while we're on this, I don't want to lose this thought. This professor came up to me recently and he said, what would you say about somebody who in your department who really is an imposter? And I said, well, I guess I'd have to know what you meant by that. And he said, well, everybody thinks this guy is really smart, but he's not. He just works really hard. And I said, well, is he successful? And he said, yes. And I said, well, then who cares? I mean, who cares? And that's the problem. They get so invested in me, like I'm smart, or I'm smarter than you, or, it doesn't matter. You could have one person who's naturally gifted as a musician or in athletics. And then someone else who's not naturally gifted, but they get out there and they rehearse and they study and they run, they exercise, they do the thing they want to get better at on a sustained basis. They could easily outpace the person who is quote unquote naturally, gifted.
Yeah. I suppose just briefly as well, what to mention, I think you touched upon it before, is people from ethnic minorities. And I think it makes quite I was going to say persuasive argument against affirmative action. Not wholeheartedly, but it's interesting that idea of maybe people feeling like they're only out of college to fulfill quotas and things like that. I imagine that'd be a really tricky one to get past if you were experiencing that personally.
Yeah, there was just a study on that actually in the U.S. That's it contributes to the pressures that minority students feel. I don't see it so much as an argument against taking affirmative measures to have a more diverse student body. I think it more speaks to the fact that whenever you belong to a group for whom there are stereotypes about competence, that could be based on race, that could be based on gender, that could be based on regional accent, for that matter. We all know which accents sound smarter and more well educated and less educated. Certainly people with certain disabilities, face stereotypes. And so whenever you're in a situation where your group is stereotyped, or in age, right? I mean, we all at least remember what it was like to be, the youngest person in a group and feel like, our competence was being judged based on age. And conversely, you might, later in life be the oldest person in a group and you're being judged on that end. I have to say, I spoke at Facebook, and when I asked if anybody there had ever, felt like they were the oldest person and were being judged based on their age, the 30-year-olds raised their hand.
Well, I can appreciate that. I'm 34, but I've experienced that, definitely. Okay, I'd like to move on to this, the concept of women being uniquely predisposed to it. So we've already established that it's cross-gendered, but still your book is aimed towards women. So I just wondered if you kind of explore why you made that decision.
Well, for a few reasons. I mean, the original research, and for quite a while, really the focus was on women. From a business perspective, that's who historically invited me to speak at their conferences. It was, women in trucking or women in commercial real estate. There were some, non-gender specific associations, but it was largely I was brought in by even on universities, it was, women in science and engineering programs. So I think the reason being that, again, many men feel this way, but women as a group are more susceptible to imposter feelings for reasons I'm happy to talk about. And as importantly, we tend to be held back by them more. There was a very informal study that was done in the engineering department at Stanford University, and across the board, all the questions, women, seem about 20% more women seem to identify with these various imposter-related questions. But one of the ones really struck me, because the question was, is there anything positive about these feelings that you have, these imposter feelings? And half of the young men thought it was positive in that it propelled them to work harder. But only 12% of the young women found it positive.
Okay.
They're more likely to, if they fail a test or they flunk out of a class, they're more likely to, just change majors and drop out, as opposed to double down and work harder. As I said, we know that women and girls are more likely to internalize failure and mistakes. So if someone says to a woman, your report is inadequate, what we often hear is I'm inadequate. I think we let it be more about who we are as a person. I also think men are more used to just culturally kind of winging it and jumping in and trying to figure things out, even if they don't know anything about it. Because when you think about it, as a boy, when you grow up, you have to act braver and tougher and smarter than you really are for survival with other boys, right? You have to kind of feign some level of confidence, and that's not as, it's not as big a part in girl culture growing up, proving yourself in that way. So, for example, we know at Hewlett-Packard, they did an internal study, and they looked at internal applications for job amongst current employees. And let's say there was 10, criteria for a job. Men would apply if they had on average 6 of the criteria. Women would apply if they had on average all 10.
Right.
So I do think there's more of a tendency amongst women to feel like, that we have to know 150% before we dare, raise our hand or throw our hat into the ring.
Do you think that's down to culture, or do you think there's a kind of, or would you be able to put it down to just the natural kind of feminine inclination, or maybe a mix of the two?
I don't think anybody will ever know the answer to that. There's people on the brain research side of things that, will observe certain, sections of the brain. Apparently that in women, the two sides of the brain communicate with each other a lot more. There's a lot more, physical connections between the two sides. So, I think women as a group, we tend to kind of ruminate more and dwell on things and go over it and over it. So if somebody did criticize my work, I'm going to just hang on to that and, lie in bed at night and think about it. And I hear this just anecdotally, women will come home and say, something upsetting like that happened, and they'll tell their husband or their boyfriend, and the husband will say, well, don't think about it. Just let it go. He's a jerk. And I think it's, quite as easy for women to do. So I don't think anyone will ever definitively say, is it how you're raised, because girls certainly are raised to kind of please. But I just hear a lot of parents with children as young as, 3 and 4 years old who do see, some differences in their daughters, wanting to get everything perfect and, are already striving for perfection quite early on.
Yeah. Speaking of anecdotal evidence, so I've not managed to find anything definitive on these points I'm going to bring up, which seem to be unique to the female experience. And I just wondered if you knew anything more about any of these. So again, anecdotally, on places like forums where imposter syndrome is being discussed and Reddit, managed to find 3 pretty interesting ones that seemed unique to the female experience, and they were related to body image and success. So the first one was that some women feeling like maybe they're making progress because of being attractive, and like you were saying, that displacement of attributing success to external factors. There's some women who were feeling like they didn't know whether they'd got a promotion because it was based on merit, or whether the boss had just taken a shine to them, and then that made them feel like imposters in their role. Another one was women feeling like they have to negate the femininity and put up a masculine facade in order to get by in like a business setting. And so they don't feel like they're being true to themselves, and the success is due to kind of playing a role rather than, again, just coming based purely on merit. And then the last one was this. There was quite a big discussion on this one, was women feeling when they put makeup on and they dress a certain way, and they go out into the world and they receive compliments for the way they look, the way they dress, and then they're feeling fraudulent because of that. They go home and do those compliments belong to me? Because when the makeup comes off and, you know, the fancy dress comes off, I don't look the same anymore. I was just wondering if there's any research on that, if you know of any kind of links between, like, say, the female experience, imposter syndrome, and body image specifically. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, we all do know that there's far greater pressure on women and their appearance. Well, it's political figures, you know, are much more likely to be, you know, are more critical of women, and even, you know, other women are. I mean, I have to stop myself sometimes when you know, it could be a you know, this incredible, you know, contributor on the world stage will walk out, and my first response is, "What's up with her hair?" You know, right. And you know, and I have to really, you know, and I tell that to women's groups, and they laugh because, you know, we laugh till you cry, right? Because we know we've all been acculturated to be the first thing that we looked at, like, what are they wearing, their hair. You know, I've been doing this for decades, Danny, and I don't hear a lot, hardly. I can't even remember the last time a woman talked about feeling like she got picked just because she was attractive. Certainly if you're going for something where you're going to be in front of a camera, a news anchor, you know, things like that, appearance is, you know, hugely important for some reason. But actually, I'm pretty sure there's studies that find the opposite, that in reality, often, you know, very attractive people don't get promoted. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, we know taller men are more likely to be promoted. You know, so there are some elements, both male and female, around physical attributes and you know, perceived competence and things like that. But sometimes it can work the opposite. You know, if a woman is extremely attractive, there's this kind of stereotypical assumption that she's not intelligent as well. In terms of, you know, kind of wearing a mask and playing a role in, you know, particularly in the corporate world, for example, you know, again, I think that's true for just about everyone. You know, there's a saying, you know, the truth is very rarely told between the hours of 9 to 5. Right. So to an extent, you know, we are all playing a certain role. And so whether it's, you know, wearing makeup or, you know, kind of pretending to be more confident than you are, or playing, you know, acting like this, you know, scholar when you don't feel like one. I think that's pretty common. I don't know that I would necessarily, I don't think it's always about imposter feelings. Right. You know, the makeup, but I think for women, it goes back to, you know, being, you know, knowing, you know, we're being judged on our appearance, and you know, so the fear that someone's going to see us as less attractive, you know, when we're not made up. Right. Okay. So before we get into what we actually do about this, how people can help this, one question remains is, what does it matter if you're getting away with it? If you're out there and maybe you feel like you're faking it, maybe you feel like you're getting away with murder, but the fact of the matter is you're getting away with it. So why does it matter? That's a good point. You know, I often have people go through this process of identifying their imposter pattern. So, and this comes from work by Dr. Jerry Weinstein called Education of the Self. He's long since retired from the University of Massachusetts. But it's a sentence stem where you take any dysfunctional pattern and you say,
whenever I'm in a situation where, so we use it for imposter syndrome. So I want them to identify, where are the moments where you feel like an imposter? Is it in the classroom? Is it when you're being challenged on your work? Is it when you're going in to meet with your faculty advisor, or you're getting ready to take an exam? Those kinds of things. I usually experience feelings of, anxiety, stress, inadequacy, etc. The negative voices in my head start saying, you don't know what you're doing. This is going to be terrible. You're going to bomb. You're going to humiliate yourself. You start awfulizing. And what I typically do is what? And that's when those coping behaviors I mentioned come in, like flying under the radar, self-sabotage, never starting or finishing, workaholism, and things like that. Then I have them step back and go, okay, what are you getting out of this? Because you got this pattern that you're doing. And so, this is protecting you from something. It's helping you get something or helping you avoid something. Humiliation, embarrassment, failure. Maybe if my pattern is to go home and tell all my friends how stupid I am and how I'm going to fail the test, and they're all going to tell me how smart I am and how great I am. I get a lot of strokes. If my pattern is to procrastinate, which is a common one, I get more free time to do other things that I'd rather do. But then I have them say, so here's what I'm getting from that. But then you have to go, well, and it's working. You're getting those things. Your pattern is working, but always at a cost. And that's where you have to step back and go, what would happen if I never change this pattern? What is this costing me? And what experiences and opportunities might I miss out on? Once you identify the price you're paying for your pattern, then you can make a conscious decision. I'm going to keep my lousy pattern because, at least, as you said, it's getting, so far so good, right? I'm successful. Or you can say, wow, it's a pretty high cost. The cost is too high, and I'm going to do something else. So, I used to be in the camp where a lot of people say, oh, but there's positives to imposter syndrome because, you're more humble and that kind of thing. And I used to say that. I don't believe that anymore. I don't think there is a positive. Because I'd much rather not, be encumbered with imposter feelings than I think it's possible to be humble and not be an imposter. I think it's a false equation that if you don't feel like an imposter, then you automatically have no humility.
I suppose some of the direct consequences of it, though, like one you mentioned before, is I think people are going to be more likely to jump before they're pushed, to just quit before if they feel like they're going to get found out, then surely it's better to quit than suffer the humiliation of being found out. I think you're going to...
or never try. Never go on the interview, never go on the audition, never start your business, never grow the business.
Yeah, like a self-imposed glass ceiling, I suppose.
Yeah.
The other one as well is that if you are succeeding, but you feel like you're getting away with it, you're not enjoying your successes. You're not enjoying the process at all. Everything's a failure.
Absolutely. There's no joy in it. You're just getting through to the next one. The next one, there's absolutely no joy. And I want people to enjoy it no matter what, win or lose, succeed or fail, to glean the learning value and keep going regardless of how they feel.
What would be some pointers you'd give to people? Because obviously, I haven't got the time here to do a workshop, and these things can take a lot of time in general, but what would be some pointers you'd give to people to kind of directly challenging these feelings?
Sure. I mean, it's really just three core things, but they're non-negotiable. And the first one is to normalize imposter feelings. This is where I have to break it to people that they're not special. A lot of people feel this way. Some of the brightest, most capable, talented people on the planet have these feelings. So, because to imposters, the fact that they even feel like imposters, the fact that they even struggle with confidence, kind of proves they must be an imposter, which is not true. We all have moments of fear. We have moments of confidence, and, allow yourself to have those ups and downs. The biggest thing, though, that people can do is to do what I call reframing, right? Because, again, it goes back to the fact that people who don't feel like imposters are no more intelligent, capable, confident. It's just that they think different thoughts. So once you become consciously aware of that thought process going through your head when you're having an imposter moment, the idea is to stop and to reframe it the way a non-imposter would. Because they could be in the exact same situation that evokes imposter feelings in you, but they're thinking something different. And we have to learn to think like they do.
Have you got a concrete example of what that might be?
Yeah, let me give you an example. This woman said to me, she was asked to pull together a major presentation at the last minute. Everyone said she nailed it. It was fabulous. But all she could think was, oh man, that was just a bunch of BS that I threw together at the last minute. Right. So she's feeling like an imposter, like she fooled them. And I said, no, the reframe here is, wow, how good am I that I can pull together information at the 11th hour that other people genuinely found useful.
Mm.
Somebody else said to me that she feels like an imposter because everyone else on the executive team is brilliantly articulate and I'm not. And there's a time, Danny, where I would have said to her, oh, I'm sure you're brilliantly articulate, but that wouldn't have served her. So instead I said, well, maybe you're not.
Right.
Maybe you're not. The reframe is, you can't be great at everything.
Yeah.
I'm good at 3 things. I'm okay at 4 or 5 other things, and I suck at most stuff. So, but I'm good with that because now I know I have the right to be wrong. I have the right to make a mistake. I have the right to have an off day. Everybody's good at something. I'm never going to know everything. It's the equivalent of trying to get to the end of the internet. I'll give you one more student example. I think it was a high school newspaper reporter called me, and she said, well, what would you say to somebody who's going off to an elite school like Harvard or Oxford, and they're thinking, oh my God, everybody here is so smart, right? There's that smart word again. I said, I would have them say the exact same thing, except for say it like this. Wow, everybody here is so smart. I'm going to learn so much from them.
Yeah.
Very different energy.
Yeah. Also, one that one of the people I've interviewed in the past, I can't remember who it was that said it. Oh, it's Professor Jason Ellis. One of his tips was embracing saying I don't know. That it's okay to if you don't know something, embrace that.
Absolutely. Not only don't know, but what I tell people is don't. I want you to not know with confidence.
Right.
I want you to be the person, because we've all been in a meeting, right, or a class where you really didn't understand, but you don't want to raise your hand, right, because that would be shameful to admit you don't know. And then somebody asks your question and the professor says, oh, what a great question, right? Or the leader says, what a great question. You're like, oh man, that was my question. So I'm really trying to get people to not know with confidence, to know you have the right to not understand, to be the person who raises your hand and says, excuse me, could you explain that a different way? Or I'm not really following here.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose the last one on this point to kind of deal with would be how to maybe deal with failure and criticism. I suppose they're quite a big. How do you reframe those?
I tell people that I think. Well, let's talk about failure. If you can look at it like a sports team, somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. The losing team does not hang up their uniform and go home. They might sit on the bench and cry, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I tell them you can be disappointed. You can be deeply disappointed, but not ashamed. The only time you should feel shame is if you really didn't try. I love entrepreneurs, Danny, because I'll interview entrepreneurs, and I consider myself an entrepreneur, but I've interviewed entrepreneurs, and they'll say things like, let me start by telling you about my 3 biggest failures, because that's where I learned the most. And that's non-imposter thinking, which I love. In terms of criticism, I have paid myself personally probably at least $100,000 to various business coaches and mentors who I've worked with, who I'm paying them to make me better speaker, better writer, better entrepreneur, business owner. I'm not paying them to tell me I'm great. That doesn't help me. When I was writing my book, I sent off chapters to 2 different friends before I would send it to Random House. And Kathy would write, little, grammatical things, some proofing, maybe a comment here and there. But Diana would say, I don't know what you're talking about. You're rambling. Didn't you cover this the last chapter? This is boring.
Yeah.
What's your point? That was much more helpful to me. So I tell people, even if someone compliments you, you want to get in the habit of saying, thank you so much. What's one thing I could have done even better? Because if you see yourself as this constant work in progress, again, it is wounding. I'm not going to suggest, I'm not wounded, at times when I'm criticized. But it's about, what can I do? What can I do about it? Let me give you an example. I got chosen to do the 6-minute TED Talk in New York. It was the most stressful thing I've ever done. first of all, I spent hundreds of hours writing the 6 minutes and practicing it. And I wanted to knock it out of the park. I mean, I wanted to be amazing. It's TED, right? And if you did a really good job, you got to go to the big TED stage. Well, I give myself like a B plus, and I wanted an A plus. So I was crushingly disappointed, right? But not ashamed. I mean, I couldn't even look at the tape for the first few weeks when they sent it to me, or I'd look at it for like 10 seconds and I'd have to turn it off, right? Because I could see immediately where I went off track. But I sent it off to a guy who I paid a lot of money to help me be a better speaker. And I love him because I'm paying him to be very direct. I have it hanging on my wall right here. This is what he said. He said, yeah, you've been better. He said, here's the deal. You practiced too much. You worked too hard. You were so focused on being perfect that you didn't have any fun. What's the worst that could happen? Nothing. Don't worry about it. Next time, don't practice and just have fun. And I got it. I printed it out in big letters. I stuck it on my wall. And that was tremendously helpful to me.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the philosopher Alain de Botton? I think that's how you pronounce it. I think he's a Swiss-born philosopher.
I am very unphilosopher savvy, so I don't think I do.
Well, yeah, he's got a video on YouTube about the imposter syndrome, and he says his advice. I'm interested what you think about this. So he says that the feeling like an imposter, it's not so much about seeing flaws in ourselves, but it's our inability to see flaws in other people, and that's because whereas we can know ourselves from the inside, we only know other people from like the outside and what they give to us, if you like. And then he uses the example, a quote by Montaigne, which is apologies in advance: "Kings and philosophers shit, and so do ladies." And the reason he uses that is, so biology rules that everybody has these functions, but we never see distinguished people doing those things. So we can't imagine that they do it. And I suppose in a modern sense, like you never see Mark Zuckerberg flustered or panicky or stressing out or worrying that everything's going to go wrong. But because we witness ourselves doing those things, but we can't imagine someone like Mark Zuckerberg doing that, then we can't imagine ourselves on that same path to success. And then if we ever do find ourselves climbing that ladder, that's what makes us feel like imposters, because those people don't get anxiety, they don't get flustered, they don't panic. I'm on the same path as those people, but I'm an anxious mess, and it's that makes us feel like imposters. And and he says that it requires a leap of faith. That the answer to imposter syndrome is a leap of faith that other people's minds work the same way that ours do, and that everyone experiences anxiety and self-doubt, and that once we're able to actually internalize that, that's when we'll no longer feel like imposters.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the more we can read biographies of people, I think that they do reveal these things. We're just not looking for them. Of course, not everyone, is so revealing, but I included a lot of quotes and stories in my book of famous people who, talk openly about, Denzel Washington. He said before he walked out on stage on Broadway to do Fences, he said, if you don't have that, what the hell am I doing here moment, it's time to hang it up.
Yeah. And you can't imagine someone like Denzel thinking like that.
Exactly. Joni Mitchell used to go off stage and vomit in between, songs because she had such stage fright.
Yeah.
I just read a book by Mike Massimino called Spaceman. He's an astronaut here in the U.S. and he failed his qualifying exams at MIT. And I loved reading his book because he talks very openly about getting a 12 on these exams and these really tough classes, but more importantly, he talked about what he did about it, which is what I really liked. He didn't just quit; he got a study group. He had people help him.
Yeah, I think another good one would be, I've not actually read this, but it sounds like a good one, is Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. And she's the chief operating officer of Facebook. Now, there's a woman that's on the top of the world, but I think she's publicly spoken specifically about struggling with imposter syndrome and feeling like a fraud. Then she's going to get found out and everything's going to come crumbling down around her. So
yeah, she has. And she also, and this is a whole nother conversation, Danny, but I have a whole chapter on it that talks about how success is complicated, and no one ever tells us that. And one reason that makes it complicated is for some people, success can separate you from other people. If you're working class and now you go off and you get this fancy job and this big degree, you're now different than your family and from your friends back home.
Yeah, that's the tall poppy syndrome.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. If you start making, as a woman, in some cultures, certainly, if you start making more money than your male companion, especially if you're in the same field, that can be complicated. If you get promoted above your friends in the department, suddenly you're their boss, that can get complicated. You have to relocate to take a job in a community where there's not a lot of other, racial minorities, or there's not a lot of, there's not a mosque, for example, there's not a lot of other Jewish people, or, whatever, there's just different ways that success comes with some costs around people. And I mentioned that because when you said Sheryl Sandberg, I saw her in an interview, Danny, and the person said, do you feel like you're successful? And she hesitated, which I get, because it is a little more complicated for women to say, I'm quote unquote, successful. And what does that mean? I do think women as a group have been allowed to have a more layered definition of success, to include meaning, balance, and men have been really kind of forced into this very small box that says success is power, money, and status.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I never thought about it like that. Yeah. Right, Valerie, before I let you go, I've got if we'd like to explore the kind of the deeper philosophical realms of your mind before I let you go.
Okay.
But before you sound nervous. Before we do that though,
I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, before we do that though, have you got any, we've mentioned a few, but have you got any specific book recommendations on either on this topic or anything else you feel would be of value to listeners? And I'll include a link to your book in the show notes.
Yeah, I think, The Confidence Code is very good. Is it The Confidence Gap? Caddy K, and I have to pull it off my shelf. I can look around the corner and grab it. I think it's either The Confidence Code or The Confidence Gap. Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, is very good. I really did enjoy Mike Massimino's book, Spaceman. I got to meet him a couple weeks ago when I spoke at Columbia University. Great guy. He's been on a TV show in the U.S. called The Big Bang Theory. I don't know if you get it over there, but
I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
Yeah, he's a very personable guy, and he was actually a good example of somebody who figured out that having a great personality is a skill. It's not. For him, it was a coping mechanism. He was not comfortable with leadership, so he would make a lot of jokes to take the focus off of him. But he it was pointed out to him that it's actually a skill, which is true. Absolutely. And the only thing I want to say about my book, The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, is what a horrible title it is. I hate the title. I voted against it strongly. Clearly, I lost that battle.
Yeah. You hear that a lot with publishers rallying against the author's ideas for the title. What was your preference for a title?
I like books where the title tells you what it is, like Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. You know what it's about.
Yeah.
Making a living without a job. You know what it's about. I would have called it something like How to Feel as Bright and Capable as They Think You Are.
Yeah, I like that as well. Yeah. Okay. If you could take the reins of power at the Department of Health, what policy would you implement to improve the mental well-being of the general public?
I would have failure camps for kids.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So they have to go in and struggle with adversity and, set up some things that they're going to fail. No matter what they do, they're going to fail. And then the focus is stepping that back and learning from the failure.
Well, interesting. That's a very interesting concept. What, if anything, keeps you up at night?
At this point in my life, what I'm spending a lot more time thinking about, Danny, is just that the only thing we really have is time, which we can't control, friends, family, and our health. And that's where I'm trying to focus right now. I have much larger concerns about climate change and things like that. But, there's a lot that keeps me up.
What's the best piece of life advice that anyone's ever given you?
Oh, gosh. I think it's that, this is off the top of my head, but that it's our job to make it look easy. So, and this was actually my faculty advisor told me that, decades ago, I was up making presentations on what we would now call diversity to hundreds of of students. I was a graduate student, and it's our job to be so good and to practice and to put in the effort that we make it look easy. And that's why I want people to know for that TED thing that I did spend hundreds of hours, because back to your point, we compare ourselves and we think for them it's easy.
Yeah.
But even Chris Rock, before he goes on one of the nightly shows here in the US, he goes out and does stand-up for a few nights in clubs to warm up. I mean, the guy's been doing this his whole professional life. You still have to, keep on top of your game and practice and make it look easy.
What mistakes do you continue to make despite knowing better?
I think probably working too hard and not delegating enough.
What part of your career are you most proud of?
I think, certainly I am proud of the work that I do on Imposter Syndrome, because I do feel like I've impacted, a lot of people. I've spoken to over 80,000 people at this point. But I have a whole nother business called changingcourse.com, which is for people who want to find a way to make a living without a job. So I'm very proud of, I train career counselors to help people who want to connect the dots between what they love to do and how can they make money doing it. So I'm very proud of freeing people from job jail.
Yeah. Okay, final two. Outside of family and academia, what investment of time or money has brought you the most joy or fulfillment?
Investment of time and money, I think, is working with people who are much further along in their, path than I am, and learning from them. I had the wonderful opportunity to be in a small brainstorming session with Sir Richard Branson.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was just, that was worth, I paid a lot of money for that experience. The money all went to his mother's charitable foundation. But I'd much rather spend money on experiences and where I could learn and grow than on many other more frivolous things.
Yeah, I suppose that's kind of that's kind of almost very much embracing the imposter syndrome, I suppose, in the sense of purposefully. It's like a famous business axiom is to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you, so that you can learn from them.
Definitely, absolutely.
Okay, here's the big one. People struggle with this one. What do you think is the key to happiness?
Gratitude.
Would you like to expand on that? I've not had that one before. That's why I asked.
Well, it's hard to be, certainly bad things happen to everyone and things we can't expect in our life or people around us. And if we can, we often get so unhappy about things that are not that important, and if you can kind of lie in bed at night and be grateful for the fact that you have, 2 arms and 2 legs, and you can hear and you can speak and you can think and you can talk, and, you have clean water and you have a bed to sleep in every night, it helps you just kind of put things in perspective. You have access to healthcare and safety and, things that many people around the world don't have and we take for granted. It shifts your thinking on the relatively mundane things that we're getting bothered by. Okay.
Valerie Young, thank you very much. Is there any links you'd like to recommend the listeners pay a visit to? And are you on social media?
Yes, I am. Well, they got to go to impostersyndrome.com. That's pretty easy to find. Yep. And on Twitter, it's just Valerie Young. Pretty easy.
Okay, perfect. Valerie Young, thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. Great job.
Okay, folks, if you enjoyed this episode and you've got a couple of minutes to spare, then maybe you'd consider leaving us a positive review on iTunes or Stitcher or whichever podcast service you happen to use. That'd be greatly appreciated. It also encourages other people to give us a listen. If you can't spare a couple of minutes, but you've got a couple of seconds, maybe you could share one of our episodes with your family or friends on social media. Don't forget you can comment on any of these episodes by going to myownworstenemy.org/podcast. And if you'd like to contact me, you can email me at danny@myownworstenemy.org. Or if email's a bit old-fashioned for you, then you can get hold of me on all the different social media channels at Danny D. Whitaker. And that's about that. I'll see you again next time.